Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing, and occasionally performing, of course, the wonderful world of Innova with today's guest, Jeff Zeigler. Would you please state your name for the record?
For the record, my name is Jeff Zeigler.
And what does Zeigler mean? Is it like cello virtuoso beyond compare?
That's a really good question. That's like the question that my family has been trying to figure out for as long as I can remember, is where the name came from. You know, because my understanding is that it's a German Jewish name, and I'm neither German nor Jewish. My father's African American, so it probably had some kind of a slave-holding connection, but it's a mystery. I think I need to do one of those DNA tests, send in my blood sample.
Absolutely, because I think given your musical path in life and your DNA, I suspect they're both amazingly diverse and interesting. You've got many cultures at the end of your fingertips.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I grew up, of course, it just all felt very normal, because kids just know what they know. But my father's African American, my mother's Japanese, and so that was the kind of house that we grew up in. I think I ate rice every day of my life, including Thanksgiving, and also there was a strong connection to various cultures growing up, and for me that just felt very normal.
And where did music come along? What's your first sound memory?
My first sound memory. My parents always loved music. I feel like I was always surrounded by, my dad playing LPs on the weekend, and a lot of jazz, actually. But I don't come from a musical family at all, not in any formal sense. My parents never studied music. My older brother played the flute for maybe a year. None of my closer or even distant relatives play music, so I was sort of like the weird one, I guess. My parents were very encouraging to study music, and I must have been okay at it because I was encouraged by all of my teachers to continue, but I remember at a point when I had to make the choice of what I would do after high school, and I made the decision to go to music school. My parents were a little hesitant about it. I knew that I wanted to play music, and my teacher thought it would be a good idea. But I gotta say, looking back, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was quite a learning curve when I entered conservatory.
Was there a moment prior to that? Was this with the cello where you got started, or what was the moment that really turned you on to say, hey, music just changed my life? That was like extraordinary.
Well, yeah, I mean, music did change my life. Even from the first moment that I picked up the cello, I still remember very vividly how that all happened. I was in this kind of exploring music workshop. The teacher, had some flyers at the school. It was something that kind of took place right outside of school, and we got to sing. We got to play the violin, scratch on the violin, play the recorder. And then there's a little recital at the end of the week or something at the local college, at Ohlone College. And it turned out that the violin teacher was actually a cello teacher. Ariel Whitbeck was her name. And after the program, she came up to me and my parents and asked if I wanted to play the cello. And I thought, great, sure, because I thought it would be fun to continue with music. But I had no idea what a cello was. I really didn't know what a cello was. And it's not just a story. I didn't have that kind of formal understanding of music, And like I said, I continued with it and decided to go to music school for college. But even that, the whole thing was such an accident. I still remember a month before I went to Eastman. The story will sound unbelievable, but it's very true. It was like August before going to Eastman, and my teacher, Margaret Tate, she said, you should probably, you're going to have to take some theory, so you should probably know a little bit. So she sat me down and taught me what a tonic chord was and a dominant. Seriously. I didn't know what it was. I'd heard these terms before, but it was all very intuitive, what I was doing.
Do you know what a cello is now, or is that one of the
I'm still
open-ended
trying
questions?
to figure it out. Yeah, it's still teaching me something new every day.
Did you have a notion that you might fall into composing, improvising, or did you think, it'll be enough to interpret the greats?
Well, I've always been fascinated with the living creation of music, you know, and I blame with a smile Margaret Tate for that, because she's a cellist in the San Francisco Symphony, and she was my teacher in high school, and she played in a string quartet called the Aurora Quartet, all members of the symphony. And one of the things they did is every concert they made sure to play a piece by a living composer. And so just that the motivation to play new and interesting music was always a part of my ear, and also playing in a string quartet. So I think that in a lot of ways Margaret's very responsible for the direction that I took in my life. And then when I went to Eastman, I actually took a composition class for non-majors. I thought, you know, I'll give this a shot, you know, and I took it very seriously. I spent the entire semester, I dedicated time to creating this piece. I figured you should start with what you know. So it was a piece for 2 cellos and piano, and had some pretty cool chords in it, I think. And I wrote it out, and then at the end of the semester, I got a few friends together to play it. And I'll never forget the first reading of it. The piece was about 2 minutes long, and it was slow. And I thought, wow, that's not very much material, you know. And so from that point on, I have a lot of respect for composers who write long pieces with a lot of notes. Wow, that took a long time. But as far as like composition, that was sort of the beginning and the end of my composing. But as far as like improvisation is concerned, it was always like so many classically trained musicians, I was always very shy about it, and very insecure about it. And it was never really anything that I did except for like, okay, if I have to do it, like, okay, I'll dance. Like, I don't want to dance, but I'll dance, you know, if my wife makes me. So, but then after I left Kronos, actually literally the day after I moved on from the quartet, I played a concert with John Zorn and John Rose at the Stone. And in a lot of ways that sort of was the first step in this new direction that I was going to take. And looking back on the last few years, I've been doing quite a bit of improvisation with Hauschka and Samuel Kosman, and we have a trio. Been doing some more work with John Zorn, did some things with Laurie Anderson, and just played a show a few weeks ago with Trevor Dunn, and it's just been something that I've been getting more and more comfortable doing. It's becoming more and more part of my creative process, and I actually mean it. I'm learning something new every day, and it's really been fun.
What's the dynamic relationship between you and composers? Composers who write you a piece,
Mm-hmm.
often a composer will limit themselves to what they know you can do and what will make you sound good and deliver the music.
Mm-hmm.
And other composers say, I think this is a performer who really likes to be challenged and learn
Mm-hmm.
new things that they can't do yet.
Mm-hmm.
Are you both of those things? Do you
Well,
have a
yeah,
preference?
I think that every performer wants to feel challenged. You know, I don't think that any composer wants to pick up a piece of music and feel like, that was really easy. You know, it was a good piece, but super easy. I think all of us enjoy the challenge of like, oh wow, that was technically demanding, and I did it. Like, you know, and that's the other part of it, is that I think performers, I tell composers, like, yeah, you want to write something that sounds harder than it actually is, right? Because we also want to, we want to shine in some way. But that gray area of like, how should a composer approach a new collaboration with the performer is, it's a fascinating thing for me, and every interaction is something new and different. Just this morning, actually, I met with a composer who wrote a piece, and he was explaining to me that up until this point, he was always very sensitive to what he felt would fit the best on the instrument. And this was the first piece he'd ever written where he actually just wrote the music first. And as a result, there were actually a number of things that we need to kind of tweak with a little bit. And he was a little uncertain. He's like, well, did I do the right thing? And I actually told him, no, you actually did the right thing. You should write the piece that you imagine. And then we have to figure out how to make it fit on the instrument, you know. But you should go with your vision first. Don't compromise the way that you hear things in your imagination for what you fear might be a problem on the instrument. Sometimes there's some simple solutions. And then there's some things that just need to be practiced.
Are there some pieces that you remember that really took a while to grow on you? When you first saw them, you really couldn't figure out what the composer was after or how to manifest it. And then by the time, maybe until the third performance, you said, oh, now I get it. It really grew on you.
Yeah. I feel like there have been. I have to think about that, though. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But that does happen, you know, because when you learn a piece of music, you know, it may be a piece that the composer wrote very quickly, or maybe they wrote it over several years, and then when the performer gets the music, then the process starts for them, you know, and there are first impressions which are often wrong, sometimes right, you know. But as you learn the piece, you also learn more about, you begin to listen more. And also, sometimes you discover some ways of how to present the music. Like, oh gosh, you know, even something small, like if we take a breath here, then this becomes clearer, and you find ways to have the music breathe in a different way than, you know, maybe a more rigid approach, which tends to happen at first because you don't want to, I don't think one should stray too far from the notation first. You should, you know, try to get inside what the composer wrote on the page, of course, you know, naturally. And then you know, as you play the piece, like the first time you play a piece, depending on how difficult it is, you might be completely freaked out, and so you can't really enjoy it. And then as you play it more, then you learn more about what was more effective. Are there certain areas that were actually much more effective than you thought? You know, one thing that's interesting, you know, when you practice a piece, you might practice sections or small fragments, and then as you get closer to the performance, you look more at the big picture. And depending on how many times you actually run the piece of music, you know, then you get a sense of the entire piece and its totality. But depending on the situation, you may only run the piece a few times before a performance, or in the worst possible situation, the performance is the first full run, you know, and so you're actually experiencing the piece in real time. And that's part of the human experience too, is that it's not so much what happens at the 5-minute mark, but at the 5-minute mark, after you've had everything build up to that point, well, now how do you feel about the 5-minute mark? You know, and now how do you feel about the 20-minute mark? And out of context, you might feel one way, but when you get the piece, when you experience the piece in its totality, that's really where the interpretive process really begins to come together, I think.
And it's usually at that point that the audience is hearing it whole and for the first time.
Right.
Are
exactly.
you sometimes surprised about how a brand new listener gives you feedback?
It's important, you know. It's actually extremely important, because you build these ideas about how you think the audience will react in a certain situation, whether it's, you know, really deep and, like, you know, maybe sad or funny, and they didn't laugh at that. You know, they didn't react the way that I thought. Yeah. And so, you know, especially when you deal with a new composition, then, you know, the composer may feel like, oh gosh, I did something wrong. Or I say, wait, time out. maybe we could have done something different. So it's somewhere in the chain. It's like a guitar pedal. Somewhere in the chain, that's where we have to look at it. But the music may be completely fine. I always think that like making changes in the music is the last resort.
One of your creative projects seems to be fatherhood.
Yes.
What's it like being a daddy and cajoling and improvising a new life?
Well, that actually, you used the word that I was going to use. There are many, many books written about parenthood, but none of them are about your child. And I feel like, and this is what I tell new parents too, that go ahead and read the books so you have the information, but your kid is different. You'll know more about your. Now I understand when people say like, "Oh, the doctor said this, but I know my child." It's like, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that, and you're constantly faced with these situations and scenarios where like, what do I do? Do I do this? Do I do this? Do I do that? Parenthood is definitely an improvisation, and my feeling is that as long as you, show love, as long as you do the right thing and try to be a good example. Of course, the jury is still out, but you can't make any mistakes that way. I mean, you make mistakes every day, but hopefully he'll turn out okay.
Whether he's a cellist or not.
Yeah. Well, actually, he is a cellist now, despite my protests. I tried to discourage him, and because I didn't want him to feel that he had to play the cello, just because I do, but he wanted to do it just like Daddy. And so finally my wife said, "Jeff, stop discouraging him. If he wants to play the cello, let him play the cello." So he's playing the cello.
Another thing you generated is Something of Life, an album for Innova, which we love. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind that, the all-encompassing universal themes that it seems to cover, and tell us about one of the pieces?
Yeah, well, the pieces on Something of Life are pieces that I've really enjoyed performing and bringing together, and they're all written by composers that I've admired for a long time, some much longer than others. But when I originally started imagining the album, it actually began with the piece Glaub by Felipe Perez Santiago. And the Glaub is the German word for belief or faith. And the piece is about beings from another world coming to Earth and learning about humanity through religion. And I thought that was really a fascinating concept, as far as the world that we live in. But then along the way, Glenn Cochi wrote this piece called Something of Life. And in that piece, Glenn took a lot of sounds from his touring with the band Wilco. And so we'll have sounds from the Japanese fish market in Tokyo, or the cathedral in Cologne, or the botanical gardens in Sydney, Australia, and he creates this tapestry of sound, and it kind of meanders, but somehow it kind of brings you through to this destination. And there's this tie of the Moonlight Sonata of Beethoven, which is actually real. That really was from the elevator in the hotel, and he really did walk into a church and hear someone perform the piece. So, but then in talking about this type of soundscape, I mean, Glenn and I, we have a lot in common. We play in groups that we join. We're playing with people a little more experienced than us, touring a lot, and we both have young families. And so, we would talk about these experiences of being somewhere really magical, Paris on Valentine's Day, or you're in this moment and you capture and you hear these disparate sounds coming together, completely separate, but then coming together in a moment that only you can experience. And there's something really beautiful about it, but there's also something really sad about that, because you're not able to share it with anybody. And so this piece kind of it became in a way a program for what I was going through at this time of moving away from Kronos and making this change in my life. So I decided to change the focus to something that kind of had a kind of more of a broader theme, and this is all something of life.
Jeff Zeigler, thank you for sharing the last few minutes of your life with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.